talk some Rocky Top. We got Nathaniel Rutherford on the line from Rocky Top Insider talking Tennessee football. Nathaniel, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We aim to deliver top-notch discussion, debate, and analysis, and I believe you're going to help us out considerably when it comes to the Vols. Let's start with the just the overview of the program in regards to one season down under Jeremy Pruitt. To me, obviously, the Auburn effort was significant in looking at the football team play that game, a Kentucky team that finished in the top 10 in the nation, being able to pull off that upset. And decidedly, the downer would have been maybe the play down the stretch in which they had hopes of getting to postseason play, but weren't able to pull it off and were drubbed by the likes of Mizzou and Vandy.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think, like you said, the wins over Auburn and Kentucky were encouraging signs, and even that effort against Georgia where they got back to within, I think, a single score, if I remember correctly, or 12 points, whatever it was, in the late in that game, and then Georgia, ran away with it, and they just played big boy football in a sense there. But I think what I attribute those last two games to more than anything was just Tennessee being spent. I mean, you look at some of the injuries on offensive line at that point, Tennessee, the offensive line was just horrendous down the stretch last year for Tennessee. And it wasn't, I'm not trying to blame the players or anything like that, because I think a lot of it was to do with injuries, and you were playing a lot of guys you weren't planning on playing in the beginning of the season at that point. And Guarantano was banged up, and he'd been dealt several different injuries and was playing through pain. You could tell in the Vanderbilt game especially, he was playing through injuries. So I think while the season ended on a down note with those two blowout losses to teams that Tennessee, ball fans don't like Tennessee to lose to in football, I do think overall last season there were signs that, okay, there's things here that you can build off of. And I think Pruitt did a great job this offseason of addressing some of those needs and, getting, I think, upgrades in the coaching staff as well.
Nathaniel, just to take in a Jeremy Pruitt news conference or hear him interviewed or talk about the program versus Butch Jones seems to be night and day. We seem to be getting a nuts and bolts football guy who doesn't want to sell anything, but basically just let us know, hey, this is the truth about the team. I don't want to give you too much. I'm running a football program. I'm running a football team versus kind of a salesman approach. And that seems to be on the surface the difference between the two.
No, that's very accurate. I think that's very accurate. The two are very, very – I don't know if you could actually have two people at Tennessee who have just as polar opposites of a kind of a attitude, a way they approach coaching, a way they approach marketing and stuff. Then you have Butch Jones and Jeremy Pruitt. And not to say that Pruitt is some, hermit who doesn't go out and do this sort of stuff. He's gotten better, I think, over the last 4 or 5 months of realizing the responsibilities of a head coach go beyond just football. And I think he's that's why I think the hire of Jim Chaney was big, because he got someone who can be kind of a head coach of the offense and do stuff for him there. But I think when it comes to the way they manage practices, with the way they manage the program, Pruitt is, in my opinion, from people who are just football purists, and in that regard, he's kind of a breath of fresh air compared to Butch Jones. And we'll see, obviously, if it works out in Tennessee, what he can do and what his style does with Tennessee. But I think overall, if you had to choose one way or the other, I think most people who have played football or have watched football for decades or years or whatever, they're going to choose what Pruitt does over what Butch Jones has done.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We discuss, debate, and analyze every day. We have moved to the SEC in Tennessee. We've got Nathaniel Rutherford on the line from Rocky Top Insider. Nathaniel, I have to admit to you, when Tennessee's got a decent team, which, again, they've been down for the last 10 or 12 years, but they've been decent, and especially those 2 9-win seasons under Butch Jones, I'm watching 6 or 7 games because I'm trying to watch everyone. When it goes south like it did last year at 5-7, sure, I saw West Virginia while it was competitive. I really wanted to see the Florida game. It got out of hand like 21-28, nothing quick. Didn't see a whole lot of that game. So my Tennessee viewing goes down the tube. So I didn't see a whole lot of Tennessee football last year. If you don't have an offensive line in play in the SEC with the speed at edge rusher and elsewhere, you're going to have some issues. And that has been an issue for Tennessee. What does the position battle look like this spring?
Yeah, right now the offensive line is getting an infusion of youth to the extent that this spring you have Wayne Morris, who is a former high 4-star, 5-star offensive lineman out of Grayson High School in Georgia. He is competing for a starting spot as a true freshman, and there's a very good chance, in my opinion, he will start for Tennessee at one of the tackle spots, maybe even guard. But I think right now mostly you're looking at him as a tackle guy. You also have Chris Akprogane, who used to be in Tennessee, who went down to IMG Academy in Florida, and he's an early enrollee. He hasn't participated a whole lot because he dealt with a minor injury before the spring started. But those are two of the young guys. And right now, you're going to welcome in Darnell Wright, who's a 5-star offensive tackle over the summer, and he'll be with the team in the fall. Those are two of the younger guys that I look at that are probably in line to get playing time. You have Brandon Kennedy returning after last season, who he played in one game and then had a season-ending injury the week after the West Virginia game. So he was a grad transfer from Alabama who had the rare grad transfer who has 2 years of eligibility. So he'll be back this season for Tennessee, and hopefully we'll be starting at center for them. Then you have, Drew Richmond is going to transfer out. He's still looking for his destination right now, but you have other guys in there, whether it's rising sophomore Jerome Carbon, Ryan Johnson, who filled in for Kennedy at center last year, who was better at guard, in my opinion. Jameer Johnson, who is a former junior college guy who played for Tennessee last year and started most of their games. Marcus Tatum at tackle. I think it's going to be very interesting to me to see how many of these young guys earn starting roles and how much they play during the season. Because I think, looking at last year, I think a lot of these guys have shown improvement in their bodies and how much weight they put on and some of their strength and stuff they've shown so far in the spring. But I still think these younger guys like William Morris and Darnell Wright are going to be upgrades over what Tennessee had last year.
We're talking up Tennessee football. We've got Nathaniel Rutherford on the line from Rocky Top Insider. Please join us on a regular basis here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, discussion, debate, and analysis like no other. Let's switch to the other side of the trenches. Defensive line needs to be fortified as well. Always a big concern. Your thoughts about where we stand in the spring and what you'd like to see come spring game.
Yeah, defensive line to me is probably the biggest question on the team. You could argue offensive line, but at least guys that are coming back there, and you have a lot of potential instant impact freshmen there. On the defensive line, you lost all 3 starters from last year, and you lost Paul Bain, who is a key depth guy who was a senior last year, who was a former walk-on, who played a very big role last year. You're really only returning one guy from last season who played any significant snaps, and that's Emmett Gooden, who was a former junior college guy who played at Last Chance U before he joined Tennessee last year. He, to me, will be a starter unless he gets hurt. But then you're asking a lot of questions from a lot of guys who were redshirt freshmen and sophomores, most likely, guys like John Mincy or Currit Garland or Kingston Harris. Tennessee does have the added benefit of, while they're not in the spring right now, they would be bringing in over the summer 2 junior college guys in Savion Williams and Darrell Middleton. And I think Williams especially will be able to find a starting role. I think one of the bigger questions, too, is can Aubrey Solomon, who transferred from Michigan, who used to be a 5-star defensive lineman coming out of high school, he transferred into the program. He's going through reps and stuff this spring. It looks like, to me, that he will be a starter as long as he's eligible. But will he be eligible? That's the big question right now is, they've applied for a waiver like they have a bunch of other grad transfers or regular transfers like you've seen with Tate Martell and Justin Fields and those guys. We've heard back about those guys, but we haven't heard back about Solomon and Gibbs yet. D'Angelo Gibbs, who transferred from Georgia to Tennessee's going to be playing receiver for the Vols. So if Solomon gets eligible, that's a huge boost to this defensive line. I think he'll start, and then you have Emmett Gooden as a starter and probably Savion Williams as the other. But then, to me, that big question is what about the depth there? Because you have a lot of inexperience, even as a starting group there, but really a ton of inexperience as the depth for Tennessee. And that as the saying goes, the SEC is a line of scrimmage league, and Tennessee has a lot of question marks about both their lines of scrimmage right now.
Good, and coming off a pretty solid 2018, 33 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. No question for the most part, although there's not been an announcement at quarterback, but Jared Guarantano played reasonably well last year considering the circumstances, 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. But of course, development at that position is crucial if you want to compete with the likes of Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and the rest. Your thoughts about Guarantano in regards to what you saw late last season in development and how it projects forward?
To me, I think he's taken to Jim Chaney's offense particularly well. I think this is his 4th coordinator in his 4th year at Tennessee. I mean, it's a lot of adjustments year to year for him. But I think Chaney's offense is particularly friendly to quarterbacks, and he does a good job of kind of just taking the strengths of the team and running with it. And I think he's taken particularly well with that. To me, what's going to be determinant of whether or not JG and this offense has a good season is going to be that offensive line, because Guarantano would have had even a better season than what he did last year if the offensive line was better. I mean, you saw multiple games last year, pretty much every single game where multiple snaps in a game, he'd have 2, maybe 3 seconds to throw the ball before he gets hit. And then there was a lot of times he didn't take as many sacks as the numbers would suggest that, looking at just watching the game and look at the numbers, you'd say he got sacked more than he did. That's because he would get rid of the ball and be hit as soon as he got rid of it. And time again, I mean, he took more hits than what the numbers are going to tell you he took. So I think this year, his growth and the offense's growth in general are going to really hinge on what the offensive line does, and they need to improve. You could argue them and Florida State were the two worst offensive lines in college football last year. This year, if they can even just be mediocre, I mean, if they can just be average, it'll be a big step forward than what they were last year. So I think that's going to be really the biggest determining factor of whether or not Guarantano takes another step is, can he get protection consistently?
It's like, Nathaniel, you need to bottle that Auburn game. I know Kentucky was the best team that you beat on paper, but they basically had a rock fight with everyone and gave everybody a chance to win. Considering when you talk about the offensive line woes last year, and Auburn had one of the very best defensive fronts in the country. And I know that they weren't, this was not a vintage Auburn team, but they were still, despite their record, one of the 20 best teams in the country. And to win that game on the road and to look at Guarantano's numbers, 21-32, 308 through the air, no picks, 2 TDs. That was really a remarkable effort. And I remember watching other games, and then all of a sudden I had to tune to Tennessee and Auburn and see what was going on there.
Yeah, that was easily Guarantano's best game of his career. You could argue, even though the stats weren't quite as good for South Carolina, I thought that was a good game plan on offense for Tennessee in that one too. That the defense lost on that game. It wasn't the offense. But I think his 3 best games last year were Auburn, South Carolina, Kentucky, and those ones, Tennessee went 2-1 in those contests, and you could argue they should have won against South Carolina if they didn't make a mistake here and there on offense or defense. But I thought those were his 3 best games last season overall, when looking at actual, legit competition, not talking about the FCS schools or the low FBS schools, but talking about SEC and Power 5 competition. I thought those were his 3 best games. And in those games, he got better protection than the other ones. And that was as simple as it was. He got better protection in those games, and that's what helped him flourish and have a better thing. And also the Auburn game, they did a little bit more just kind of 50-50 balls and throwing up to his receivers. And I think last year, Tennessee's receiving core was probably one of the more underrated receiving cores in the country. And I think this year they're going to be very, very good as long as, like I said, as long as the offensive line steps up and gives Guarantano time to get the ball to them. You have a lot of upperclassmen in Juwan Jennings, Marcus Callaway, Josh Palmer, Brandon Johnson there. You have a very good trio or kind of quartet of receivers, and you have some really good young guys coming in like Ramel Keaton, and you have Jordan Murphy, who's been there for another year and has got really good shiftiness and everything. So I think that what was the common thread in his best performances last year was the fact that Tennessee protected him better. It gave him an opportunity with play calling and protection both of utilizing his strengths as a quarterback.
And Callaway, certainly the marquee guy there in terms of name recognition for SEC fans and people across the nation, caught 37 last year at 16 yards per catch and a couple touchdowns. Nathaniel Rutherford on the line from Rocky Top Insider. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Please lock in right here. And this is a better question maybe for August, but I'll throw it out anyway. Considering what happened last year, personnel that you have coming back, what by SEC standards is probably a marginal recruiting class, but by most standards across the nation in the top 20 range is a very good recruiting class. Nathaniel, your thoughts about reasonable expectations this year?
Yeah, like you said, it might be better for August to ask that question once we get to fall camp. But I think based off what we've seen now and with the coaches that they brought in, Jim Chaney, T. Martin, and Derek Ansley are the 3 new guys on the staff this year. And with the guys they brought in recruiting, I'm very interested to see these other guys who weren't early enrollees when they come in the summer, into the fall. But I think a bowl game is reasonable. That's definitely, to me, I think if they don't make a bowl game this year, it'll be disappointing. Last year, it was kind of, you thought they could make a bowl game, but you weren't sure. And you look back on it, and there was a couple of swing games that if, the South Carolina one in particular, they win that one, they obviously are into a bowl game, but they didn't, so they weren't. I think this year a bowl game is perfectly reasonable. I think even 7 wins, looking at what the schedule is for this season for Tennessee, like I said, this isn't April. This is still months away from the season beginning. But I think looking at the schedule right now, I think 7 wins is doable as long as you take enough steps forward. But I think a bowl game, especially, that is perfectly reasonable. And if Tennessee doesn't get there, I think that's when you can say this season was a disappointment. But I think 6-7 wins is definitely kind of the range most people will put Tennessee in this year.
Yeah, it's of course a rivalry that has to stay intact for tradition reasons, but you draw the short straw with Alabama every year, and that's just
Yeah.
something that is difficult to overcome in comparison to what. And then with the rotation coming up this year, it's Mississippi State, certainly not top end in the West, but a formidable team, and don't really have that crushing, difficult non-conference game that you typically have to run into with a BYU on the slate and a winnable game there. Nathaniel, we appreciate you stopping by. Great insight into the Vols, and certainly you can stop by anytime.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it very much.